Today's lecture is on Metaphor and Anger. Metaphors We Live by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, talks about several metaphors. Argument is war, time is money, love is falling, and how these metaphors operate not in poetry but in everyday language. So he attacked my argument. I've never won an argument. I don't have time to spend with you. You need to budget your time. I fell head over heels in love with him. Are you falling in love? People often distinguish between metaphors and similes. A simile is when you use the word like. My love is like a rose. Or a metaphor is when you just equate the two. My love is a rose. But basically, both of them are models. They model the love, the person's feelings for this woman that they love. We're just going to treat them as if they were the same for our purposes. So when you use something to model something else, the model doesn't apply, not all of it. So, for instance, my love is a rose. She's beautiful, blooming in her youth, but will fade as she gets older. She has a sweet scent. But you forget about the parts. You just leave off the parts of the model that have to do with thorns or bugs or drooping or browning. When you say, my love is like a rose, and you emphasize the sweet scent of your love, you just leave off of the model certain things that don't apply. That model will highlight some features of your love or the thing it's modeling, and it will hide others. So this man is saying, my love smells sweet, but you might fall in love with somebody who works out a lot and doesn't always smell sweet. So that model may not work for you in terms of thinking about who you love. So I want to distinguish between this a little bit. Here we've got a model of the eye. Now, when you're thinking about how this model applies to the eye, you just forget the base and the stick of it. But using this model to think about the eye, the fact that it is a model means that it doesn't really apply. Your eye is not made out of hard plastic, right? So this model highlights the structure of the eye. It's showing us how it's all working together and the blood vessels. But it hides the fact that eyes are soft and gushy. So the model itself, even all the parts you intend to use of it as your model, highlight and hide things. Now, Percy Shelley in 1820 wrote an essay called The Defense of Poetry. And in it, he talked about the origin of language as vitally metaphorical. In other words, when language was starting, he wants to say, all of it was metaphor. But then what happens later is that those metaphors kind of die off and you just take them as literal things. Just like when we say, I need to spend time with you, we don't think about time as money. We're just using it as a literal way of designating time. So he says new poets need to arise to revitalize language. And I'm going to show you in this video how that works. So let's talk about the origin of language being metaphorical by looking at the history of the word impediment. So I use the Oxford English Dictionary database, which you can get online at our library just by going to databases and typing in capital OED, and you'll see a link to the Oxford English Dictionary. So if we look up impedio, the Latin for impediment, we can see that it originally meant to shackle the feet. So somebody said impedio, they wanted you to go shackle the prisoner's feet like this. Now, obviously, moving and walking with a shackle on your feet is not easy. It keeps you from doing things, right? So then, impedimentum came to mean hindrance. And that's how we get it as impediment, a hindrance or an obstacle. But before it got that meaning, it originally accrued the meaning of heavy baggage. So how do you get from a chain on your feet to heavy baggage, and especially of an army? Here's a poster about Trajan's column in Rome, which represented wars between the Romans and the Dacians. And if you look at it, they're in battle. But how did they get to these battles? Well, these soldiers, many of them were on horses, but many of them were on foot, and they had to carry large bags of clothing or whatever they needed of their supplies to get to the battle. So can you picture some soldier walking next to another and the other one saying, "It's hard this march," and the other person saying to him, "Yeah, I feel like carrying this bag, I feel like I have an impediment on." Impediment, shackles on the feet. You're carrying the bag, it feels like you're walking in shackles. So that soldier who said it feels like I'm impedo, walking in shackles, that soldier used a metaphor, and that metaphor entered into our language as meaning. This is why all of the cognitive psychologists now are talking about embodiment. So Lakoff again, he actually wrote a book with Rafael Nunez called Where Mathematics Come From, and claims that even mathematics come from, even logic, it all comes from the details of your embodiment. Words usually are seen as the opposite of instinct and body, pulling us up out of those things into rational communication. But words cause emotion. We know that when someone tells us something upsetting or says something mean. Words map your thoughts and feelings, but they are not just out of the box neutral. They contain metaphors, which means that they model reality for us, and they import systems for thinking into sentences that we just use to communicate and to understand ourselves. The anger metaphorical system is really derived from the physical reaction to anger. Your heart beats faster, your temperature rises. Now, if the word anger were just reporting on those physical effects, it wouldn't be a metaphor, and it would be heat or something, like it would specify a certain kind of heat. But it's not. It's the word anger, which bears no relation to heat, except when we use metaphors to talk about reality, that brings that physical reality back in. So anger is modeled by a metaphorical system, George Lakoff says, in which it is fire or the heat of fluid in a container, and you're trying to keep the pressure back, but when you can't, it explodes. And that's the basis for our understanding of anger, for the way we think about anger. We think of it as steam coming out of your ears, as if you were a pot boiling. So anger is figured in our ordinary language as a fire or explosion. He really burns me up. I couldn't take it anymore, so I just blew my stack. These are in our ordinary language. And what the model fire, what fire used as a model for anger highlights is loss of control. It's inescapable, like you can't turn off a burning sensation. You have difficulty suppressing it. It's spontaneous. What it hides is responsibility for the anger, the role that thought plays in the anger, the fact that anger can be long-term, and that you can plan according to your anger. What if the model we used for anger was a plant? Well, we can do that poetically, but if it were in our language, you would have to speak as if anger were a plant. Somebody say, "What did you do last night?" "Oh, I was just watering my anger." We don't say that. That's nonsensical. If you said that to somebody, they would look at you like, "What?" So it isn't, that model isn't in our language. It isn't repeated when we just speak ordinary language. But if we did model anger as a plant, it would highlight responsibility. I mean, I water the plant, I nurture it, I nourish it. So I am responsible for bringing this, for increasing or augmenting my anger. It shows me in control of my anger. It shows that if I don't nourish it, it might die. And it sees it as long-term. This metaphorical model, in contrast to anger and explosion, hides the intensity and the spontaneity of anger. So what we're interested in, though, is the kind of agency you imagine you have when you model anger in these two different ways. So I want to define agency. Agency is the capacity of individuals to act, okay? It's the capacity of individuals to act. So if you model anger as fire, you're not imagining that you have much capacity to act. You aren't in control of it. You can try to put it out, but it's going to take some kind of frenzied effort on the part of all the people standing around you. It's not really your problem. Whereas if anger is modeled on a plant, you do have the capacity to control the anger and to control the size it grows to. People now, in trying to help human beings control anger, have started talking about anger management, and that imports the model for anger. Anger is a kind of business. You control what goes in and out of your business. So you're going to manage your anger the way you manage your stock in your business. We do talk about nursing our anger, which gets close to cultivating it as if it were a plant. I've searched the OED and found the first instances of nursing anger, nursing wrath, or nursing the embers of enmity, hatred, in around the 1860s and 70s. That's the first time I'm really seeing that metaphor imported into the English language. It began with nursing a fire. People talked about keeping a fire going, so you nursed the fire, you took care of it. And then that expanded, that metaphor, in the 1860s and 70s to anger. The poem that you're reading for this week is from William Blake's Songs of Innocence and of Experience, which was published between 1789 and 1794. He hand-printed these books of poems. There are only about 14 copies. And one of the poems is The Poison Tree. So first, let's take a look again at the typical model of anger as codified into our language. I just exploded. So you come to reading Blake's poem with the notion of anger as fire and explosion. And he's the new poet that Shelley was talking about. I was angry with my friend, I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe, I told it not, my wrath did grow. That's in keeping with the metaphorical system that Lakoff identified, in the sense that you, as a person who's angry, are a container, and anger is boiling water or something that's trying to escape that container. You know, he told it to his friend and it ended, so he got it out of his system. He didn't tell it to his foe, and so it grew. Now, typically where we go from here is the pressure building and building and building until that person explodes. But that's not where Blake goes. He says, my wrath did grow, and I watered it. I watered it night and morning with fears and tears. I sunned it with deceitful smiles. I gave it sun and water. I nourished it. And it grew both day and night till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. So he nourished his anger until it killed his foe. Watering your wrath, imagining it as a plant, and imagining something beautiful that somebody would want to steal as the fruit of your anger. Those are very different, and they offer us different ways of thinking about anger. So watering your wrath, when I think about that, I remember a situation where I saw my sister and she didn't tell me she liked my new shoes. And I left and I thought, she didn't even tell me she liked my new shoes. Like, she's always just imagining that I have no taste, and she just drives me nuts. She thinks she has so much better taste than I do, going on and on and on in my own mind. And then at some point yelling at her, "Why do you think I'm tasteless?" And she's like, "What? What are you talking about?" Well, I had built up this whole anger for her that really wasn't about her. It was really about the anger. What else we might consider is that some of the results of people's work could be anger. And I think that's true. I think sometimes results of work that don't come out so well are really just because they're the result of anger. It's interesting to think about. Notice in the drawings of Blake's poems that they're very different. He used the same copper plates to print each poem, but he hand watercolored them. So you can see that there's color differences, even though the lines are the same. Although sometimes the colors can be used to hide the lines. Notice in this picture that the foe outstretched beneath the tree, the foe and the tree are really distinct. But in this picture, the foe could be the tree roots. He kind of blends in with the tree roots. That's more suggesting what I realized about being angry with my sister for my tastelessness. You build up that foe. You make that foe into a foe by nursing your anger, by watering it and sunning it and helping it grow. So notice that Blake is trying to overturn our habitual ways of thinking that are just codified into our language. And he shows us basically that there is a way out. If you are using words to think about and judge yourself, then you're prosecuted by your language. Poetry helps you look at how certain of your ideas come from speaking your language every day by showing you what words are like when you don't speak them every day, when you focus on them. And then showing you that there are other ways to speak, that there's an outside, that you can think differently.